One pure text output. Story begins now. The fluorescent lights in the diner were buzzing like angry wasps when she leaned over my shoulder, her breath smelling faintly of mint and coffee. "Police are outside," the waitress whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. "Hide now." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my husband's eyes widen across the booth. He didn't ask questions. He just stood up, grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the bones shift, and pulled me toward the kitchen. The world tilted sideways in that moment. The red vinyl of the booth seat felt sticky under my palm as I braced myself. The plate in front of me, eggs over easy, hash browns, wheat toast, suddenly looked absurd, like props in a play I didn't know I was performing in. Other diners looked up from their meals, their faces registering confusion, then concern, then that particular brand of curiosity that comes from witnessing someone else's crisis. I wanted to tell them this was a mistake, that I was just a 62-year-old woman having breakfast with her husband, that there was no reason for police to be looking for us. But Richard's grip on my wrist told a different story. He pulled me through the swinging kitchen door, past a cook who didn't even look up from the griddle, past industrial dishwashers and stainless steel counters stacked with supplies. The air smelled like grease and bleach. My sensible walking shoes, the ones I'd bought at Nordstrom Rack specifically for our retirement travels, squeaked on the linoleum floor. Richard shoved open the back door and we stumbled into an alley that reeked of garbage and old cooking oil. "Run!" he hissed, and we ran. At 62 and 67, we weren't built for running anymore. But fear has a way of making you forget your limitations. My lungs burned, my knees protested. We zigzagged through side streets I didn't recognize, in a city I'd lived in my entire life, but suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Richard pulled me into a parking garage, and we crouched behind a SUV, both of us gasping for breath. I remember that moment with crystal clarity even now. The concrete floor of the parking garage was cold and gritty against my palms. My heart hammered so hard, I thought I might have a heart attack right there, just like my first husband, Tom. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard's hand was still gripping my arm, his fingers digging into flesh that would bruise purple by evening. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder, then fading away. "What did you do?" I whispered, finally finding my voice. "Richard, why are the police looking for us?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were scanning the parking garage, calculating our next move like he was playing chess and I was just a piece on his board. When he finally looked at me, there was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not the gentle, concerned husband. Not even the cold manipulator I'd confronted days earlier. This was something else. Fear. Real fear. "We need to get out of the city," he said. "I have a plan. Just trust me." Trust him. The man who'd spent years systematically dismantling my life, who'd forged documents and drugged me and turned my family against me, was asking me to trust him. The absurdity of it would have been funny if I wasn't so terrified. That was 3 months ago, and that moment, the panic, the confusion, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue, was the beginning of understanding that my entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. But it was also the moment I realized that Richard's con went deeper than I'd imagined. The police outside that diner weren't there because of what he'd done to me. They were there for something else entirely. But let me back up. 3 months earlier, I was living what I thought was a peaceful retirement. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was 62 years old, living in Phoenix in a house that had been in my family for 40 years. The kind of house with a front porch where neighbors still waved, where the crepe myrtle tree in the yard marked every season with its blooms. I'd raised my kids there, buried my mother from that living room, hosted Thanksgiving dinners that spilled out onto the lawn. That house was my heartbeat, my history written in every creaking floorboard. The house had seen me through everything. I could still see the marks on the kitchen doorframe where I'd measured Sarah and Marcus's heights every birthday. The pencil lines climbing higher and higher until they both surpassed me. There was a crack in the ceiling of the master bedroom that looked like a river, that my first husband Tom and I used to trace with our fingers on lazy Sunday mornings. The backyard fence still bore the dent from when Marcus crashed his bike into it at age 9, split his lip open, and I'd held him crying in my arms while Tom called the doctor. Every room held ghosts of my former life, but they were good ghosts, comforting ones. The living room where my mother spent her last months, her hospital bed positioned by the window so she could watch the hummingbirds at the feeder. The dining room where Sarah announced her first pregnancy, where we all cried happy tears and made impossible plans. The garage where Tom kept his woodworking tools, where the smell of sawdust still lingered even though he'd been gone 5 years. I'd been married to Richard for 7 years, my second marriage after my first husband passed. Richard came into my life like a gentle breeze when I needed it most, or at least that's what I told myself. He was attentive, charming, always knew exactly what to say when my adult children were driving me crazy, or when the loneliness of widowhood felt like drowning. He moved into my house 6 months after we met, and a year later, we were married in the backyard under that same crepe myrtle tree. I met Richard at a grief support group, of all places. It was 18 months after Tom's death, and my sister Jenny had insisted I go. "You can't just sit in that house forever," she'd said. "You need to talk to people who understand." So I went, expecting nothing, wanting only to appease her. Richard was sitting in the circle, his silver hair perfectly combed, his eyes warm and sad in equal measure. He talked about losing his wife to cancer 3 years prior, about the empty house that echoed with memories, about learning to cook for one after decades of cooking for two. Everything he said resonated with me. The others in the group nodded along, but I felt like he was speaking directly to my experience. After the meeting, he approached me in the parking lot. "I'm Richard," he said, extending his hand. "I couldn't help but notice during your sharing, you lost your husband to a heart attack?" "Yes," I said. "Sudden. 1 minute we were arguing about whether to get new gutters. The next he was on the floor and I was screaming for someone to call 911. Richard's face creased with sympathy. "The sudden ones are the hardest. You don't get to say goodbye. You don't get to prepare." We stood there in the parking lot of a community center, 2 broken people finding recognition in each other's pain, and talked for an hour. He was easy to talk to, undemanding, genuinely interested in what I had to say. When we finally parted, he asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime. I said yes without hesitation. Our courtship was gentle, appropriate for people our age who'd loved and lost. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates. He brought me flowers, grocery store bouquets, nothing extravagant, just cheerful daisies or carnations. He never pushed for physical intimacy, seemed content to hold my hand, to kiss me goodnight at my front door. He met Sarah and Marcus and was respectful, friendly, but not trying too hard to replace their father. 6 months in, he mentioned that his lease was ending, that he was thinking about moving somewhere smaller. I'd been rattling around in my 4-bedroom house alone, and the offer came out of my mouth before I'd fully thought it through. "You could move in here. We spend all our time together anyway. It would save you money." He'd hesitated, said he didn't want to impose, didn't want to rush things, but I insisted. The house felt too big, too empty. Having someone there, someone who understood grief and loneliness, felt like a solution to problems I'd been ignoring. He moved in on a Saturday in October. Sarah and Marcus helped, though I could see the reservations in their eyes. Marcus pulled me aside while Richard was bringing in boxes. "Mom, are you sure about this? You've only known him 6 months." "Your father and I got engaged after 4 months," I reminded him. "When you know, you know." "That was different. You were 23. Age doesn't make the heart any less certain, I said, and I believed it. I really did. Richard fit into my life seamlessly. He took over cooking dinner, said he enjoyed it, and I'd been eating too much takeout anyway. He organized my medicine cabinet, set up a system with labeled pill containers for each day of the week. He volunteered to handle the lawn maintenance, the bills, the small repairs that had been piling up since Tom died. He made himself indispensable so gradually that I didn't notice it happening. My daughter Sarah lived 2 hours away in Tucson with her family. My son Marcus had moved to Seattle for work years ago. We talked, sure, but the distance made everything feel diluted, like we were connected by threads instead of bonds. Richard filled that gap. He was there for the doctor's appointments, the grocery runs, the quiet evenings watching television. He took care of things, he said. Let him handle the bills, the paperwork, the boring adult stuff so I could just enjoy my retirement. Looking back now, I can see how the web started forming. But when you're in it, you can't see the spider weaving. It started small. A credit card statement that didn't arrive. A property tax notice that Richard said he'd already handled. My sister Jenny called one afternoon, confused because I'd apparently missed our monthly lunch date. But I hadn't known we had one scheduled. Richard said I must have forgotten, that maybe I should get my memory checked, just to be safe, at my age. At my age. Those 3 words became a weapon I didn't recognize until it was too late. The first real crack in the facade came 6 months into our marriage. I needed to access the safe deposit box at the bank to get my mother's pearls for Sarah's birthday. Richard had offered to get them for me, but I insisted on going myself. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia who'd known me for 20 years, gave me a strange look when I asked to access the box. "Mrs. Crawford," she said carefully, "your husband closed that box 3 months ago. He said you'd decided to move everything to a home safe." I stood there in the climate-controlled bank lobby, the air conditioning suddenly feeling like ice water in my veins. Patricia's office had family photos on her desk. Her kids, now grown, a new grandbaby. I'd watched those kids grow up through updates at the bank. She knew me. She knew I wasn't the type to forget closing a safe deposit box I'd had for 30 years. The words stuck in my throat. I must have forgotten. You're right. We did move everything to a home safe. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Concern? Pity. "Are you feeling all right, Mrs. Crawford? Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just a senior moment. Thank you, Patricia." I walked out of that bank with my heart hammering, my hands shaking. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and tried to remember. Tried to pull up any conversation about closing the safe deposit box, moving items to a home safe. The memory wasn't there. It was just empty space, like a file that had been deleted from a computer. I hadn't decided anything. I didn't even know we had a home safe. But I smiled at Patricia, made some excuse about forgetting, about getting older and losing track of things. I didn't want her to see the confusion, the first whisper of fear that maybe something was very wrong. That night I asked Richard about it. He was in the kitchen making dinner, chopping vegetables with precise, methodical movements. The knife against the cutting board made a rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk that was almost hypnotic. "Oh, that," he said without looking up. "I told you about it, remember? We talked about how safe deposit boxes aren't really safe anymore with all the bank failures. I got us a fireproof safe for the closet. Much more secure." "When did we have this conversation?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About 4 months ago. We were watching the news. There was a story about a bank that had lost customer property during a flood. You got worried about your mother's jewelry. Said you wanted it somewhere more secure." He looked up at me then, his expression patient and kind. "You really don't remember?" Had we talked about it? I searched my memory like rifling through a filing cabinet, but I couldn't find the conversation. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was forgetting things. I was 62, after all. My mother had started showing signs of dementia around this age. The thought terrified me more than I wanted to admit. "I guess I forgot," I said quietly. "Can you show me the safe?" "Of course, right after dinner." He went back to chopping vegetables, the subject closed. while I stood there feeling like the floor had turned to quicksand beneath my feet. I know you're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me to wake up, to see what was happening. But let me tell you something about doubt. It's paralyzing. When you start questioning your own mind, your own memory, you become untethered from reality. You grab onto anyone who seems certain, who seems to have answers. And Richard always had answers. The conspiracy deepened slowly, like water seeping into a basement. My sister Jenny stopped calling as often. When I asked Richard about it, he said she'd told him I'd been short with her on the phone, that maybe we needed space. That didn't sound like Jenny, but when I called her, the conversation was awkward, stilted. "Hey, Jen," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I feel like we haven't talked in forever." "We talked last week," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Did we? I don't remember." A pause. "Mom, are you okay? You sound, I don't know, different." "I'm fine, just tired." "Richard and I have been busy with the house." Another pause, longer. "Richard said you might need some space from family obligations, that you were feeling overwhelmed." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He said that? In his email, he said you'd been stressed out, that too many social commitments were making it worse. What email? The one you sent from your account. Well, he signed it, but it was from your email. Jenny's voice had a note of concern now. "Are you sure you're okay?" Yes, I forgot I asked him to send that. You know how it is. Sorry, Jen." We hung up shortly after, the conversation dying an unnatural death. I sat holding the phone, trying to remember asking Richard to email my sister, trying to remember feeling overwhelmed by social commitments. The memories wouldn't come because they didn't exist. But Jenny believed they did. My own sister believed I'd asked for space, believed I was having memory problems. Maybe I was having memory problems. The alternative, that Richard was systematically lying to my family, seemed too outlandish, too cruel. Marcus called one Sunday, his voice tight with frustration. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were selling the house?" My heart stopped. "What are you talking about? I'm not selling the house." There was a long pause. "Dad said you were thinking about downsizing, that you'd asked him to look into retirement communities. He sent me brochures." Dad. He called Richard Dad, even though Richard wasn't his father. It made me feel strange, displaced in my own family. "Marcus, I never said anything about selling. This house is staying in the family. It's yours and Sarah's someday." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, Mom, if you say so. Maybe Dad misunderstood." But the seed was planted. My own son thought I was losing my grip on reality, making plans I couldn't remember. That night, I confronted Richard again. We were in bed, the room dark except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains. "Why would you tell Marcus I wanted to sell the house?" Richard rolled over to face me, his expression concerned in the dim light. "Honey, we talked about this last month. You said the house was getting too big, too much maintenance, don't you remember? We were sitting right here, and you said you were tired of dealing with the yard, the repairs. I wanted to scream that I'd never said that this house was my history, my identity. But the doubt crept in like fog. Had I said it? Had there been a night when I was feeling overwhelmed, when the words came out without me meaning them? My memory felt like Swiss cheese, full of holes I couldn't identify until I fell through them. "I would never sell this house," I said, but my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. Richard sat up, turned on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made me squint. He took my hand, his expression tender and worried in equal measure. "I know this is scary. I know you don't want to admit that something might be wrong. But these memory lapses, they're getting worse. Maybe we should make an appointment with Dr. Morrison, just to check things out, rule out anything serious." The way he said it, so gentle and caring, made me want to cry. Because what if he was right? What if I was losing my mind and he was the only one brave enough to tell me? The thought was terrifying, but somehow less terrifying than the alternative, that everything he was saying was a lie. "Okay," I whispered. "We can make an appointment." He squeezed my hand. "It's going to be okay. I'm here. I'll take care of you, no matter what." That should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like a door closing, like a trap snapping shut around my ankle. The property I sacrificed wasn't just physical space. It was my autonomy, my certainty, my connection to my own life. Every time I questioned Richard, he had documents, emails, receipts. He showed me my own signature on papers I didn't remember signing. He played voicemails where my voice agreed to things I had no memory of agreeing to. Either I was losing my mind, or he was gaslighting me so expertively that I couldn't tell the difference. I chose to believe it was my mind. It was easier that way, less terrifying than the alternative. My daughter Sarah came to visit for my 63rd birthday. She brought her kids, and we had cake in the backyard under the crepe myrtle tree. But something was different. She was distant, formal. When the kids went inside to watch TV, she sat down across from me at the patio table. The afternoon sun filtered through the tree branches, dappling the table with moving shadows. I could hear the kids laughing inside, could smell the remnants of the birthday cake. Chocolate with vanilla frosting, my favorite. Sarah's hands were wrapped around her iced tea glass, condensation dripping onto the table. "Mom, are you okay? Really okay?" The question cracked something open in my chest. "What do you mean?" She looked uncomfortable, playing with her napkin. "Richard called me last week. He said you've been having episodes, forgetting conversations, getting confused about dates. He said you got lost driving home from the grocery store." I stared at her, my mind reeling. I'd never gotten lost. I drove the same route to the same store I'd been going to for 20 years. "Sarah, that never happened. I don't know what he's talking about." She looked at me with such pity, it made me want to disappear. "Mom, it's okay if you're having problems. We just want to help. Maybe you should see a doctor, get evaluated. Early intervention is important with these things." "What did he tell you exactly?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Sarah shifted in her seat. "He said you went to Safeway last Tuesday. Said you called him from the parking lot, crying, saying you didn't recognize where you were, that he had to come get you and drive you home." "That's not true. Sarah, I swear to you, that never happened." But even as I said it, doubt flickered across her face. And why wouldn't it? Her stepfather, who'd been nothing but kind and helpful, versus her mother who was 63 and potentially showing signs of dementia. Who would you believe? "He seemed really worried about you," Sarah said softly. "He said he's been covering for you, not wanting to upset Marcus and me, but it's getting worse, and he doesn't know what to do. These things, dementia, Alzheimer's." The words hung in the air like ghosts. My own daughter thought I was losing my mind because my husband had convinced her of it. And the worst part? I was starting to believe it too. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? It's like standing on quicksand where solid ground used to be. The months crawled by. Richard took over more and more of my life. He managed my medications, my appointments, my finances. He told me the doctor said I needed to reduce stress, that he'd handle everything. I let him because what choice did I have? If I couldn't trust my own mind, I had to trust someone. Little changes accumulated like snow drifting against a fence. My smartphone disappeared, replaced with a basic flip phone. "The smartphone was confusing you," Richard explained. "This is simpler, easier to use." My laptop developed problems, and Richard said it wasn't worth fixing. "You can use the tablet for email. It's more intuitive." The tablet, of course, was set up on Richard's account. He could see everything I did, every email I sent, every website I visited. I didn't understand that at the time. I just accepted his help, grateful that someone was making technology manageable for me. My car keys went missing more and more frequently. Richard always found them, but the locations became increasingly bizarre. In the freezer, in the bathroom medicine cabinet, in the pocket of a coat I hadn't worn in months. Each time, he'd present them with a mixture of concern and patience that made me feel like a child. "You really don't remember putting them there?" he'd ask. And I didn't. I couldn't imagine a reason I'd put my keys in the freezer. But they were there, so I must have done it. What other explanation was there? My sister Jenny stopped calling altogether. When I tried to reach her, she was always busy, always had an excuse. Years later, I'd learned that Richard had been sending her emails from my account, saying cruel things, pushing her away. But at the time, I just felt abandoned, isolated in my own life. One particular email I later discovered accused her of being jealous of my happiness with Richard. It said that she'd always been bitter and competitive, that I was tired of her negativity. Jenny had sent back a hurt, angry response, saying if that's how I felt, maybe we did need space. I never saw that exchange. Richard deleted it from my sent folder, deleted her response. To me, it just looked like my sister had decided to stop talking to me. The house started feeling different. Richard redecorated, said it would help with my mood. My mother's furniture disappeared into storage. Family photos came down from the walls, replaced with generic prints from Home Goods. He said it was healthier to live in the present, not the past. But every change felt like an erasure, like my history was being painted over with bland, neutral colors. "The clutter was making your anxiety worse," Richard explained when I asked about the photos. "The doctor said a calmer environment would help your memory." "Dr. Morrison said that?" "During your last appointment, don't you remember?" I didn't remember. I remembered going to the appointment, remembered sitting in the exam room. But the details were fuzzy, and I couldn't recall Dr. Morrison saying anything about photos or clutter. Still, Richard seemed so certain. And if I couldn't remember what was said at my own doctor's appointment, what did that say about my mental state? I gave up fighting. I gave up questioning. I just existed in this half-life where nothing felt real, but everything felt wrong. The sacrifice wasn't just property or possessions. It was my identity, my story, my right to my own reality. Then came the accident that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, unremarkable in every way. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my email on the tablet Richard had set up for me. He said it was easier than a computer, more intuitive. I was looking for a confirmation email for a doctor's appointment when I saw it, an email thread between Richard and my sister Jenny. But it wasn't in my inbox. It was in my sent folder, and the email address was mine, but I hadn't sent it. The subject line read, "Estate planning documents." My hands started shaking as I opened it. The email was from 3 weeks ago, from my address to Jenny, and it said, "Per our discussion, I'm attaching the updated will and power of attorney documents. As we agreed, Richard will handle everything if something happens to me. It's just easier this way, and we both know the kids will fight over every detail. This way, it's clean." Attached were PDFs, legal documents with my signature, a will that left everything to Richard, with only token amounts to Sarah and Marcus, a power of attorney that gave Richard complete control over my finances and medical decisions, documents I had absolutely no memory of signing, discussing, or agreeing to. I scrolled up through the thread, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. There were months of emails, all from my account, all in my name, discussing the division of my estate, the sale of the house, the management of my assets. Jenny's responses were careful, concerned. She questioned whether I was sure about these decisions. She suggested I talk to the kids, but I had insisted, had been adamant that this was what I wanted. One email in particular made my blood run cold. It was dated 6 weeks ago. "Jenny, I know you think I'm making a mistake, but Richard is my husband and he's earned this. The kids will get their inheritance eventually, but right now I need to secure my future. If my memory gets worse, I need to know someone I trust is in control. Stop questioning my decisions. It's my life and my money." I would never write those words. Never. The tone was wrong. The phrasing was wrong. The sentiment was completely wrong. But there it was, sent from my email address, with my name at the bottom. The email was never meant for me to see. It was supposed to go only to Jenny. But Richard had made a mistake, had CC'd me instead of BCCing me, and now I was staring at proof that my entire life had been hijacked. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the tablet trembling in my hands. This wasn't dementia. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was systematic, deliberate betrayal. Someone had access to my email, was sending messages in my name, was forging my signature on legal documents. And the only person with that kind of access, that kind of opportunity, was Richard. The fog lifted all at once, and what I saw in its absence was terrifying. Every confusion, every lost document, every strange look from family members suddenly made sense. He'd been isolating me, turning my family against me, making everyone believe I was incompetent so he could take everything I owned. The vase, my mother's vase, the blue crystal one that had sat on the mantel for as long as I could remember, was lying in pieces in the trash can. I'd asked about it that morning, and Richard said I'd knocked it over during one of my episodes, that I didn't remember. But I did remember. I remembered it being there 2 days ago, and I remembered not touching it. He'd broken it himself. He'd been breaking me the same way, piece by piece, until I was too shattered to see the pattern. I couldn't breathe. The walls of my own house felt like a prison. I needed air, space, distance from this place that had been my home, but now felt contaminated by lies. I grabbed my purse, my car keys, finding them exactly where I'd left them on the hook by the door, not in any bizarre location, and I left. I didn't tell Richard where I was going. I just drove, ended up at a coffee shop downtown, sat in my car in the parking lot, and cried until my throat hurt. The tears came in waves, anger, betrayal, relief, fear, all of it mixing together until I couldn't tell which emotion was which. I'd been right. My mind wasn't failing. But that meant Richard had been systematically lying to me, manipulating me, stealing from me for months, maybe years. Which was worse, being sick or being a victim? That's when I met her, the stranger who became my unexpected ally. She was younger, maybe 40, sitting on the bench outside the courthouse next door, smoking a cigarette with the desperate intensity of someone trying to calm their nerves. I must have looked like hell because she caught my eye and said, "Bad day?" I laughed, and it came out like a sob. "You could say that." She gestured to the space beside her. "Court brings out the worst in people. You got a hearing? Not today, but maybe soon." I didn't know why I was talking to her. Maybe because she was a stranger, someone with no stake in my life, no reason to lie to me. We sat there in silence for a moment, and then she said, "Family or money?" "What?" "The reason you're here. In my experience, it's always one or the other, family or money, sometimes both." "Both," I heard myself say. "My husband is stealing from me, stealing my life, my property, my relationships, and he's been doing it so carefully that everyone thinks I'm crazy." She nodded like this made perfect sense. "It's scary what people do for money, right? My ex-husband drained our joint account while I was in the hospital having our baby. Took everything, opened credit cards in my name, ruined my credit, all while I was in labor." "How did you stop him?" She took a long drag from her cigarette. "Documentation, evidence. I kept every receipt, every text message, every email, built a case so airtight his own lawyer told him to settle. You can't fight crazy with emotions. You fight it with facts. Facts, documentation, evidence. Research reveals that 20% of family caregivers of people with dementia admitted to neglect. But I didn't have dementia. I had a husband who was systematically destroying me to get to my assets." "Where do I even start?" I asked. She stubbed out her cigarette. "Start with your bank. Get statements for all your accounts. Check for transactions you don't recognize. Then get copies of any legal documents, wills, powers of attorney, anything with your signature. Compare signatures, look for patterns. And whatever you do, don't let him know you're on to him. The minute he knows, he'll start covering his tracks. I thanked the stranger, went home, and started digging. When Richard asked where I'd been, I said I'd gone for a drive to clear my head. He seemed relieved, probably thought I was falling back in line. But I wasn't falling anymore. I was climbing out. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I went through every drawer, every file cabinet, every box in the garage. I found documents I'd never seen, signatures that looked like mine but felt wrong. I set up a new email account that Richard didn't know about and started forwarding everything to myself. I took photos of papers with my phone, saved everything to a cloud account he couldn't access. The new email account was on a free service, accessed only through a browser in private mode. I created it at the library, using their computer, because I didn't trust anything in my house anymore. The password was the name of my first dog, something Richard wouldn't know. Every time I found something suspicious, I photographed it with my phone and emailed it to this secret account, then deleted the photo from my phone and cleared the email from my sent folder. I became meticulous, paranoid even. I started keeping a journal, handwritten and hidden in a box of tampons in the bathroom closet, a place I knew Richard would never look. In it, I documented everything, every conversation, every time my keys went missing, every time Richard told me I'd forgotten something. Dates, times, exact words when I could remember them. The journal became my anchor to reality. On days when Richard's gaslighting felt overwhelming, when I started doubting myself again, I'd sneak into the bathroom and read my own words. Concrete evidence that I wasn't crazy, that the things I remembered had actually happened. I wrote about the smallest details, the way Richard's left eye twitched when he lied, how he always touched his wedding ring when he was fabricating a story about my supposed memory lapses. I documented conversations verbatim when I could. Richard said today that I called him from the grocery store crying, confused about where I was. This is false. I was at the grocery store, but I never called him. I came home with the groceries. He greeted me at the door with concern, asking if I was okay after my episode. I played along, but I know this never happened. The act of writing it down, of seeing the truth in black and white in my own handwriting, gave me strength. It reminded me that my perception was valid, that my memories were real. Without that journal, I might have lost myself completely to his lies. I found the home safe he'd mentioned, hidden in the back of our bedroom closet behind winter coats. The combination was my birthday, which would have been sweet if it wasn't so calculated. Inside were my mother's pearls, her rings, the deed to the house, and a folder of documents that made my blood run cold. There were multiple wills, each dated progressively later, each giving Richard more control. There were forged powers of attorney with signatures that had clearly been traced from real documents. There were bank statements showing transfers from my accounts to accounts I didn't know existed. There was a brochure for a memory care facility with a sticky note in Richard's handwriting. Deposit, $15,000. Monthly, $8,000. The memory care facility was called Serenity Gardens, and the brochure showed smiling elderly people doing puzzles and watercolor painting. It looked nice enough on the surface, but I knew what it represented. Richard was planning to have me declared incompetent and locked away in a facility while he took everything I owned. The deposit was due in 3 months, according to another note paper-clipped to the brochure. 3 months. I had 3 months before he planned to put this scheme into action, maybe less, if he accelerated the timeline. He was planning to institutionalize me, to have me declared incompetent and locked away in a facility while he took everything I owned. The paper trail was there, the plan was there, laid out in meticulous detail. I took pictures of everything, put it all back exactly as I'd found it, and closed the safe. Then I went into the bathroom and threw up until there was nothing left. That night at dinner, I smiled at Richard across the table and asked how his day was. He seemed surprised by my good mood, but pleased. He didn't know that I'd just spent the afternoon documenting his betrayal. He didn't know that the fog had lifted, and I could finally see clearly. "It was good," he said, serving me a portion of the chicken he'd made. "How about yours? Any episodes today?" "No," I said pleasantly. "I feel clearer than I have in months, actually." Something flickered in his expression. Concern? Suspicion? "That's great, honey. Maybe the new medication is working." "What new medication?" I almost asked, but caught myself. I was taking vitamins that Richard had bought, that he handed me each morning with breakfast. I'd assumed they were just supplements. Now I wondered what else might be in those pills. The next morning, I palmed the pills instead of swallowing them, flushed them down the toilet. Within 2 days, I felt sharper, more alert. Whatever he'd been giving me, it wasn't vitamins. The silent changes started immediately. I contacted a lawyer, a woman named Margaret Chen, who specialized in elder financial abuse. I showed her everything I'd found, and her expression grew darker with each document. "This is criminal," she said. "This is fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. We need to act fast before he realizes you're onto him." Margaret Chen's office was in a building downtown, 4th floor, with windows overlooking the city. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and removed her glasses. "Mrs. Crawford, I've been practicing elder law for 23 years, and this is one of the most sophisticated cases of financial abuse I've encountered. Your husband is very good at what he does." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We fight back, methodically, carefully, and with overwhelming evidence. The good news is, you've already started building that evidence. The bad news is, once we start moving against him legally, he'll know. And people like this don't give up easily." "I don't care. I want my life back." Margaret nodded. "Then let's get started." We started moving pieces on the chessboard. Margaret helped me open new bank accounts at a different bank, ones Richard couldn't access. We filed paperwork to revoke all the fraudulent powers of attorney. We got statements from my doctor confirming I had no cognitive impairment, that I'd never been diagnosed with dementia or memory issues. Dr. Morrison was shocked when I explained what had been happening. "Mrs. Crawford, I never recommended memory care. I never said you were having episodes. Your cognitive function is perfectly normal for your age. Better than normal, actually." But the medications?" I asked. "Richard said you prescribed something new." Dr. Morrison checked his records. "I prescribed low-dose blood pressure medication 6 months ago. Nothing that would affect your memory or cognition. What have you been taking?" I described the pills. Dr. Morrison's face darkened. "Those aren't from me. I'd like you to bring me one so we can have it tested." The pills turned out to be a combination of antihistamines and herbal supplements, nothing dangerous, but certainly enough to make me drowsy and foggy-headed. Richard had been deliberately clouding my mind while telling everyone I was developing dementia. And then we went after the property. The house was in my name alone, had been since before I met Richard. But he'd been trying to change that, had forged quitclaim deeds and filed them with the county. Margaret got those invalidated, got restraining orders on the property, made sure he couldn't sell or mortgage anything. It was like watching dominoes fall. Every fake document he'd created, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, we unraveled it all. And I did it without him knowing, continuing to play the confused, compliant wife while behind the scenes, I was taking back everything he'd stolen. Sarah and Marcus didn't know what was happening at first. I couldn't risk telling them and having Richard find out. But I did reach out to my sister Jenny, sent her an email from my new account explaining everything. She called me crying, said she'd been so confused by the emails she'd been receiving, that they didn't sound like me, but she didn't know what to think. "He told me you were sick," she sobbed. "He showed me medical documents, said the doctor recommended I give you space. I'm so sorry I believed him." What medical documents? I asked. A letter from Dr. Morrison. It said you were in early-stage dementia, that family stress was making it worse. That limited contact was recommended. Jenny, Dr. Morrison never wrote that letter. Richard forged it. The silence on the other end was heavy. I should have known, she finally said. It didn't sound like you. Those emails, the things you said, they were so cruel, so unlike you. But he had documentation, and I thought, it's not your fault, I told her. He's very good at what he does. But it's over now. What can I do to help? Just be ready. When this goes public, I'm going to need you to back me up, to tell people what happened, what he showed you. Anything, Jenny said fiercely. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I'd been planning to wait until all the legal pieces were in place, but Richard forced my hand. He came home one afternoon with papers for me to sign, said they were updates to our insurance policies. But I looked at them carefully this time, really read them, and they were applications to put me in that memory care facility. I'm not signing these, I said, my voice steady. He looked surprised. Honey, the doctor recommended it. You've been getting worse. This place is beautiful. They'll take such good care of you. I spoke to Dr. Morrison yesterday, I said, watching his face. He said I'm in perfect cognitive health. He was quite confused when I asked him about his recommendation for memory care, since he never made one. The mask slipped, just for a second, but I saw it. The concerned husband disappeared, and something cold looked out from his eyes. You must have misunderstood him. You know how you get confused. I'm not confused, Richard. I know exactly what you've been doing. The forged documents, the fraudulent transfers, the emails you've been sending in my name. All of it. He stood there, perfectly still, and I watched him calculate his next move. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes in the air. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. The mundane sounds of everyday life continuing while my world shattered and reformed into something new. Finally, he smiled. It was a terrible smile, empty and sharp. Who's going to believe you? Everyone knows you're losing it. Your own kids think you're incompetent. I have doctor's notes, witness statements, documented episodes. You have forgeries and lies. I have the truth and enough evidence to bury you. His expression changed then. The charming mask fell away completely, and what remained was something calculating and cruel. You think you're so smart? You're just a confused old woman. I've been planning this for years, long before I ever met you. So you admit it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Admit what? To trying to help my mentally incompetent wife? To taking care of her finances when she couldn't? To making difficult decisions for her own good? That's when he got mean, really mean. He told me I was nothing without him, that I'd die alone in this house, that my kids would never forgive me for turning against him. He said things designed to hurt, to make me doubt again. You're pathetic, he said, his voice low and venomous. A dried-up old woman clinging to a house she can't maintain and memories that don't matter anymore. I gave you purpose. I gave you companionship. Without me, you're nothing but a burden waiting to die. The words should have hurt. A year ago, they would have devastated me. But now they just confirmed everything I'd learned about him. He was a con artist, and when the con fails, you see who they really are. But I didn't doubt anymore. I saw him clearly now, and he was just a con artist who'd chosen the wrong mark. I didn't fight back with words. I just called Margaret. She'd been on standby, waiting for my signal. Within an hour, there were police at my door with a restraining order. Richard was removed from the house. The locks were changed that night. Watching the police escort Richard out of my house was surreal. He maintained his composure, played the concerned husband to the end. This is a misunderstanding, he told the officers. My wife is confused. She has dementia. Please, let me show you her medical records. Sir, we need you to leave the premises, one of the officers said firmly. As they led him down the front steps, Richard turned back to look at me. The expression on his face wasn't anger or even fear. It was disappointment, like I was a project that hadn't worked out as planned. I stood in the doorway of my house, and watched him go. The locksmith was already there, ready to change every lock the moment the police car pulled away. The fallout was swift and brutal. I informed everyone who mattered: the bank, the county clerk, my financial advisors, my family. I showed them the evidence Margaret and I had compiled. Some people were shocked. Others admitted they'd had suspicions but hadn't wanted to interfere. My financial advisor, a man named Tom Hendricks, who'd managed my account since before Tom died, sat in my living room looking at the bank statements and shaking his head. "I should have caught this," he said. "These transfers, the new accounts, I should have questioned them." "He had forged powers of attorney that gave him authority to act on my behalf," I said. "You weren't supposed to catch it." "Still." "I'm sorry." Marcus flew in from Seattle the next day. He stood in my living room, looking at the timeline Margaret had created, the flow chart of fraudulent documents and forged signatures, and he cried. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have protected you. You didn't know because he was very good at what he did. But it's over now." Marcus pulled me into a hug, and I felt him shaking. My strong, successful son, who'd moved across the country to build his career, reduced to tears by what had almost happened to his mother. "I believed him when he said you were sick. I thought you were losing your memory. I was preparing myself to lose you the way we lost Grandma." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "And I'm not sick. I'm right here and I'm fine." Sarah was harder. She'd believed Richard, had trusted him, and accepting that he'd manipulated all of us was painful. But when she saw the documents he'd forged, including one that would have disinherited her children, she came around. He was going to take everything from us, from the grandkids, and he almost got away with it. "But he didn't," I reminded her. "We stopped him." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "How could someone do this? How could someone be so cold, so calculating? Because to him, we weren't people. We were marks, assets to be acquired." The justice was external and absolute. The district attorney prosecuted Richard for fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Even though I wasn't actually vulnerable, he'd spent so much time establishing that narrative that it became evidence of his intent. The trial was public enough that everyone in our social circle knew what he'd done. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Margaret beside me. I watched as the prosecution methodically dismantled Richard's defense, presenting document after document, witness after witness. Those 3 weeks were exhausting but cathartic. Every morning, I'd wake up early, put on one of my best outfits, the clothes Richard had told me were too young for me, that I should donate, and I'd walk into that courtroom with my head high. I wanted the jury to see me. Not as the confused, incompetent woman Richard had described, but as I actually was, sharp, coherent, and absolutely sure of what had been done to me. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected from television shows. Fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable wooden benches, the constant shuffling of papers and quiet conversations between lawyers. But it became my theater of justice, the place where the truth would finally be heard by people who had the power to do something about it. Jenny testified about the forged emails and the fake letter from Dr. Morrison. Watching my sister on the stand, her voice shaking as she described how she'd believed I was sick, how she'd distanced herself from me based on Richard's lies. It broke something open in me. She cried while testifying, and I cried watching her. The prosecutor had to pause to let us both compose ourselves. "Doctor." Morrison testified that he'd never diagnosed me with cognitive impairment, never recommended memory care, never prescribed the medications Richard claimed. He brought his complete medical records for me, showed the jury documentation of every appointment, every conversation. "Mrs. Crawford is one of the sharpest patients I have," he said. "Her memory, her cognitive function, all completely normal. There was never any indication of dementia or any other impairment." Patricia from the bank testified about the safe deposit box closure that I hadn't authorized. She admitted she'd had a feeling something was wrong when Richard came in alone, but she'd accepted his documentation. "I should have insisted Mrs. Crawford come in herself," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I've known her for 20 years. I should have protected her better." Tom Hendricks testified about the suspicious account transfers, about how Richard had used the forged power of attorney to move money from my accounts into new accounts I knew nothing about. The numbers were staggering. Over $200,000 had been transferred over the course of 2 years. The prosecutor, a woman named Andrea Reyes, was relentless. She walked the jury through Richard's scheme step by step, showing how he'd isolated me, manipulated my family, forged documents, and planned to institutionalize me. She showed them the emails he'd sent in my name, had a handwriting expert testify about the forged signatures, presented the pills he'd been giving me, and the toxicology report showing they weren't prescribed medications. Richard's defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-wife, tried to suggest the documents were legitimate, and I was simply confused. But the evidence was overwhelming. You can't argue with forensics, with timelines, with testimony from doctors and bankers and family members. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years. He also had to make restitution, though he had so little left after his legal fees that it was mostly symbolic. But what mattered was that everyone knew the truth. My doctor wrote a letter to the court stating I'd never had cognitive issues. My banker testified about the suspicious account transfers. Jenny told the court about the fake emails. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, I felt something release in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was validation. Confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that what happened to me was real and wrong and criminal. Richard's family turned on him. His own sister called me to apologize, said she'd always known he was a con man, but hoped he'd changed. His adult children from his first marriage reached out, said they weren't surprised that he'd done something similar to their mother. "He drained my mom's savings while she was dying of cancer," his daughter told me over the phone. "Told us kids she'd wanted him to have it. We didn't find out the truth until after she died and we saw her will. She'd left everything to us. But it was already gone." "I'm sorry," I said. "I wish I'd known. We tried to warn people, but he's so charming, so convincing. I'm just glad you got out before." Before it was too late. Before I was institutionalized or dead, and Richard had everything. The social consequences were almost worse for him than the legal ones. He couldn't show his face in Phoenix without people crossing the street to avoid him. His church expelled him. The retirement community where he'd been volunteering banned him. He became a cautionary tale, the charming man who'd tried to steal an old woman's life and lost everything when she fought back. But the real victory wasn't his loss. It was what I gained. After everything settled, after the trial and the restitution and the divorce, I focused on rebuilding. Not just my life, but myself. The person I'd been before Richard, before the doubt and the fear and the isolation. I started swimming again. I'd been on the swim team in high school, had loved the water, the rhythm of strokes, the meditative quality of lap after lap. But somewhere in the chaos of marriage and kids and widowhood, I'd stopped. The local rec center had a senior swim program, and I joined. At first, I could barely make it 2 laps. My muscles had forgotten what they knew, but I kept going. Swimming became my therapy. Every stroke pushed away another piece of what Richard had done to me. Every breath was a reclamation of my autonomy. The chlorine smell, the echo of the pool, the burning in my shoulders. It was all proof that I was alive, that I was strong, that I'd survived. In the water, I was weightless. The trauma couldn't follow me there. Richard's voice, his lies, his manipulation, all of it stayed on dry land while I cut through the water, lap after lap, stroke after stroke. The rhythm was meditative. Breathe, stroke, stroke, breathe. My body remembered what my conscious mind had forgotten. Muscle memory from 45 years ago, still there, still reliable, still mine. Other swimmers would come and go, but I kept swimming. Some days I'd do a slow, steady crawl, focusing on form and breathing. Other days I'd push myself, racing against my own previous times, challenging my aging body to remember its strength. The rec center staff started to recognize me, greeting me by name when I arrived. "You're here every day," one young lifeguard said to me once, "rain or shine." "Consistency is important when you're rebuilding," I told her. I didn't elaborate. She probably thought I meant rebuilding my fitness, and I suppose I did. But I was rebuilding so much more than that. The first time I swam a full mile without stopping, I cried in the shower afterward. Not sad tears, but tears of achievement, of reclaiming something I'd lost. I'd forgotten how much I loved the water, how powerful it made me feel. Swimming had been mine before Tom, before my kids, before Richard. It was purely mine, and I'd taken it back. That mile marker became symbolic. If I could swim a mile at 63 after everything I'd been through, what else could I do? What other pieces of myself could I reclaim? The question excited me instead of terrifying me, and that was new. For the first time in years, I was looking forward instead of backward. I started going every morning at 6. The pool was quiet then, just a few other early risers doing their laps. One of them was a woman named Gloria, 73, and fierce. She swam like a machine, flip turns and all. We became friends in the wordless way of swimmers, just nods and smiles between sets. One morning, after we'd both finished our laps, we sat in the hot tub and she said, "You've gotten faster." "Thanks. I used to swim in high school. I'm trying to remember how." "Memory is a funny thing," she said. We spend so much time trying to forget the bad stuff that we forget the good stuff too. Swimming is good stuff. She was right. I'd let Richard steal so much from me, but I wasn't going to let him keep it. I started taking back other pieces of my life. I repainted the house, put my mother's furniture back where it belonged, hung the family photos again. I invited Sarah and Marcus and the grandkids over for Thanksgiving, cooked the whole meal myself in my own kitchen. Thanksgiving that year felt like a resurrection. I made my mother's dressing recipe, the one I'd made for 40 years. I set the table with her china, the good stuff that Richard had wanted to sell. The house smelled like turkey and sage and fresh rolls. Smells that were older than my marriage to Richard, that connected me to a history he couldn't touch. Sarah helped me in the kitchen, and at one point she stopped chopping celery and said, "Mom, you seem different. Lighter." "I am lighter," I said. "I'm not carrying his lies anymore." Marcus carved the turkey the way his father used to. My grandkids ran through the house laughing. Jenny came with her family, and we sat together at the table that had seen so many of these dinners, and for the first time in years, I felt at home in my own life. Jenny and I started having our monthly lunches again. We didn't talk about Richard or what had happened. We just talked about our lives, our kids, our plans. It felt like coming home to a friendship I'd thought was lost. I even started dating again, though I was cautious. Probably will always be cautious now. But there was a man at the rec center, someone Gloria introduced me to, and we went to dinner a few times. Nothing serious, but it was nice to know I could still connect with someone, could still enjoy companionship without suspicion. His name was Frank, and he was a widower who'd lost his wife to ALS 3 years prior. We talked about swimming, about our kids, about the difficulty of navigating life alone after decades of partnership. He was kind and funny and had no interest in my finances or my house. We were just two people enjoying each other's company, no strings attached. On our third dinner, Frank asked me directly, "What happened to make you so careful? Every time I try to pick up the check, you insist on splitting it. When I offered to drive you home last week, you looked panicked. I'm not trying to pry, but I can tell you've been hurt." I appreciated his directness. After months of lies and manipulation, honesty felt like fresh air. So I told him. Not everything, but enough. I told him about Richard, about the gaslighting, about almost losing everything. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned as I talked. "I'm so sorry that happened to you," he said when I finished. "And I understand the caution. For what it's worth, I'm not looking for anything more than friendship, companionship, someone to share a meal with, talk to. My finances are my own. Your finances are yours. I don't need rescuing, and I don't need to rescue anyone. I just like your company." That honesty, that clarity, meant more to me than any romantic gesture could have. We continued our casual dinners, sometimes with Gloria joining us, sometimes just the two of us. It was comfortable, uncomplicated, and exactly what I needed. The house, my house, felt like mine again. I walked through the rooms and saw my history on the walls, my mother's taste in the furniture, my grandchildren's laughter echoing in the backyard. Richard had tried to erase all of it, but it was still here. I was still here. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something that might help you or someone you love who's going through something similar. Because here's the thing, what happened to me isn't rare. It's frighteningly common, and most people don't see it until it's too late. Understanding the cycle is crucial to helping those trapped in it. Financial abuse and exploitation follow a pattern, and if you know what to look for, you can intervene before the damage becomes irreparable. It starts with isolation. The abuser gradually separates the victim from family and friends, creating a bubble where they control all information and relationships. They might say your family is too demanding, that your friends are bad influences, that it's healthier to focus on your immediate household. But what they're really doing is removing your support system, the people who might notice what's happening and intervene. Next comes the doubt phase. This is where the abuser makes you question your own perception, your memory, your competence. They might hide your keys and then ask if you've been forgetting where you put things. They might change appointments and then express concern that you can't remember making them. They create cognitive dissonance, making you doubt your own reality until you have to rely on them to tell you what's true. Then there's the takeover phase. They start managing your finances, your healthcare, your daily life. It happens gradually, under the guise of helping you, protecting you, making things easier. But what they're really doing is gaining control of all your assets and decision-making power. By the time you realize what's happening, they've already positioned themselves as indispensable. The final phase is the exploitation. They forge documents, transfer assets, isolate you further. They might even try to have you declared incompetent so they can act with impunity. If you resist or catch on, they use the foundation they've built, your family's doubts about your competence, your social isolation, your dependence on them, to dismiss your concerns. Why do people stay in these situations? It's not weakness or stupidity. It's psychological manipulation so sophisticated that even strong, intelligent people can fall victim to it. They stay because they've been systematically convinced that their own perception is unreliable. They stay because everyone they trust has been turned against them or pushed away. They stay because the abuser has made themselves seem like the only stable thing in an increasingly chaotic world. I stayed because I was terrified of losing my mind. The thought of dementia, of becoming a burden to my children, of losing myself piece by piece. That fear was so powerful that I accepted Richard's version of reality rather than face the possibility that my brain was betraying me. He knew that fear and weaponized it against me. If you suspect someone you love is being financially or emotionally exploited, here's what you can do. First, don't approach it with accusations. The victim has been conditioned to defend the abuser, to explain away concerning behavior. Instead, maintain contact. Even if they seem distant or the relationship feels strained, keep showing up. Keep calling. Keep inviting them to things. Your presence is a lifeline, even if they don't recognize it yet. Second, document everything. If you notice strange financial transactions, Unexplained changes in legal documents, unusual isolation, or concerning comments, write it down with dates. Create a timeline. This documentation might be crucial later when the victim is ready to act or when legal intervention becomes necessary. Third, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The fact that you're having these concerns means you're seeing something the victim might not be able to see anymore. Don't dismiss your own perception just because the abuser or the victim tells you you're overreacting. And if you're the one in this situation, if you're reading this and recognizing yourself, please know that your doubts about your own competence are likely the result of systematic manipulation. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. You're being gaslit, and it's abuse. The fact that you're questioning what's happening is actually a sign that your internal compass is still working. Get help. Talk to someone outside the situation. A doctor, a lawyer, a therapist, a trusted friend who the abuser hasn't isolated you from. Create a paper trail for yourself. Open a separate email account and forward yourself copies of important documents. Take photos of concerning papers. Document conversations. Build a case against the lies you're being told. And remember, financial abuse thrives in secrecy. The moment you start talking about what's happening, the moment you seek help, the abuser's power begins to crack. They rely on your silence, your shame, your confusion. Breaking that silence is the first step to breaking free. One more thing I learned. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Some people told me I should forgive Richard, that holding on to anger would only hurt me. And maybe they're right about forgiveness being for my own peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean letting him back into my life. It doesn't mean pretending what he did was acceptable or understandable. It means acknowledging what happened, feeling the full weight of it, and then choosing to move forward without letting it define me. I forgave myself first, for the doubts, for the times I believed him over my own perception, for the months I lost to his manipulation. I forgave myself for being human, for being vulnerable, for having fears that he exploited. That self-forgiveness was harder and more important than any forgiveness I might extend to him. There were nights when I'd lie in bed and replay every moment, every decision, wondering how I'd missed the signs. The therapist I started seeing helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Richard's choices, that his betrayal was his alone. But still, the what-ifs haunted me. What if I'd been more vigilant? What if I'd questioned him sooner? What if I'd never met him at all? My therapist, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, specialized in trauma recovery. She was younger than me, maybe in her early 40s, but she had a wisdom that transcended age. In our second session, she said something that shifted my entire perspective. "You're asking yourself what you could have done differently," she said. But that's the wrong question. The right question is, what did you do when you finally saw the truth? Because from what you've told me, you didn't collapse. You didn't give up. You fought back. You gathered evidence, you built a case, you took control. That's not the behavior of a victim. That's the behavior of a survivor. Those words, survivor, not victim, became my mantra. Yes, I'd been victimized, but I'd survived. And not just survived passively, but actively fought for my life, my identity, my future. Dr. Rodriguez also helped me understand that people like Richard are experts at manipulation because they study their targets. He didn't choose you randomly, she explained. He chose you because you were vulnerable, recently widowed, isolated from your kids by distance, trusting. Those aren't flaws in you. Those are normal human conditions. He exploited normal human vulnerability. That's on him, not on you. But dwelling on what-ifs doesn't change what happened. I can only move forward with what I know now, with who I am now. And who I am now is stronger than who I was before all this started. Not because of what Richard did to me, but because of what I did in response. I didn't let him destroy me. I destroyed his carefully constructed lies instead. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this was a long story, and I know parts of it were hard to hear, but I wanted to tell it completely, honestly, because maybe someone out there is living through something similar right now. Maybe my story can be the thing that helps them see their situation clearly, that gives them the courage to act. I'm curious, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Are you sitting in traffic, doing dishes, lying in bed unable to sleep because a story like this hits too close to home? I'd love to know. Drop a comment and tell me your city and your time zone. It helps me remember that these stories, as personal as they are, connect us across distances. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or recognize something in your own life, please hit the like button. It helps more people find this content, and maybe my story can help someone who really needs to hear it. I want to know what you think about everything that happened. Do you think the justice Richard faced was enough? Would you have handled things differently? What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing your perspectives, your stories, your advice. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I share stories like this one regularly, real experiences from real people navigating the complicated, painful, sometimes beautiful chaos of family relationships, betrayal, and recovery. There's a whole community here of people supporting each other through difficult times. I'd also recommend checking out 2 other stories on this channel. There's one about a woman who discovered her daughter-in-law was systematically isolating her from her grandchildren, and another about someone who found out their sibling had been stealing from their elderly father. Both stories have elements that might resonate with what we talked about today, and both show different paths to resolution and healing. One last thing. If you're in a situation like mine was, if you're being exploited or abused or manipulated, please reach out for help. Call the National Adult Protective Services hotline, talk to an elder law attorney, contact your local area agency on aging. Resources exist. People want to help. You don't have to